Hi, and welcome back to the Watch Talk channel. I'm Patrick, and today I'm going to be doing my utmost to be less awkward than I was in our first video. In this video, I'm going to be joined by seasoned watch dealer Alan Wood to talk through the big three questions that have been on our minds this week. Let's make the call. Hi Alan, how are you doing?
Hi Patrick, great to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thanks so much for joining me today. As you know, we've got some discussion points here to chat about. I'm really looking forward to getting your thoughts on those.
Yeah.
Before we get into things, could you show us what's on your wrist today? I'm intrigued to find out.
Of course, yeah, sure. This is probably going to be a bit of a shock to you,
Right.
or at least a surprise. It's a Vulcan cricket
Oh, wow.
alarm watch. So
That's awesome.
the original alarm watch, perhaps one of the original really useful tool watches, because the alarm function is super simple to operate, really loud, and the winding of both the alarm and the mainspring on the watch is all handled on one crown. So you wind it wind it clockwise to wind the watch, and anti-clockwise to wind the alarm
Wow.
barrel. So that it's two barrels. It's really simple and clever.
That's awesome. And it's a conventional 3 o'clock crown, is it? Right, as opposed to the member box with the off-sensor one.
Just a simple crown, and then a button for switching on and off the alarm.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good stuff. The original presidential watch, if I'm not mistaken, before the Rolex president, we had the Vulcan cricket. Did we?
Well done, you're quite right. Yeah. So most people think of the Rolex Date 8 as the president's watch, whereas this was the original president's watch.
Sure.
Given as a gift to 2 or 3 of the presidents in the 50s, I think.
Sure. I assume there's some form of American link with Vulcan, maybe.
I think perhaps in the ownership, although it's a Swiss company, it always was a Swiss
Sure.
company, but I think there's some link in terms of ownership.
Well, I'm wearing an American connection. It's a Hamilton khaki 38mm field style watch. I think it's loosely based on the Vietnam Hamilton field mil-spec field watches,
Popular
but
one.
with a date. Yeah, with a date and a polished bezel, so it's a bit more everyday dress. But had it for about 6 months. We had a shaky start together. I ordered it from America on eBay. I'm sure everyone's seen, the lower price in dollars.
Yeah.
Bought it from America and got slapped with a load of import tax, so that was a bit of a rough start. But
It's all the way, yeah.
yeah, that aside, I think it's fantastic. As I said, 38mm, I think it's a really great case size for me and a good everyday watch. And also it's got that ETA Swatch Group Powermatic movement with 80 hours of power reserve, which is
I know
pretty impressive for a
I know
value watch.
they're very well regarded, although it's a modern piece, so I'm not so familiar with them. But
Sure.
yeah, a popular and cool watch to have these days.
Yeah, well, yeah, just reliable movements, really, I think. And when it comes to servicing, a lot more affordable than some of the higher up in-house stuff. Cool. So let's get right into the first discussion point of this video. We're going to be talking about casual trading, and then the question is whether or not casual trading restricts enjoyment of the hobby, being a watch enthusiast. So I guess if I may, I'll start with what I understand the definition of casual trading is. I see it as people who have a genuine enthusiasm towards watches as a whole, but who also enjoy buying and selling in order to make profit as a side hustle. Would you agree with that definition?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, once they get hooked on vintage watches or watches in general, they'll perhaps start to build a collection, and the natural thing to think of is perhaps what the next watch might be, and perhaps what to sell in order to afford it. So it's a kind of natural progression, which some people will get more into than others, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it can add enjoyment to the hobby. There are two markets, obviously. I'm not talking about the hot market, the hot Rolex market, which is
The flippers.
Yeah. That's a separate game altogether, which it's just incredible to watch. But I don't know how long the legs are in that market.
Sure.
I feel much safer with vintage watches which have been through the depreciation curve and are naturally going to increase in value, whereas the modern watch trading market is much more volatile, perhaps.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right when it comes to, I think the negativity surrounding trading or watch enthusiasts is people that solely center their collections around these hypey sort of commodity style watches. As you mentioned, the hot Rolexes, the 5711s, the steel Pateks.
Yeah.
But with that sort of mindset of collecting, I don't really understand it. If you're not into the watches from an enthusiast perspective and you don't enjoy wearing them, and just that part of the ownership experience, I don't quite understand the financial reasons behind using them as investment carriage. Because I'm, again, not a financial expert, but I would have thought there'd be better sort of short-term investments if you're purely looking for a return and you're not looking for any sort of enthusiasm around the subject.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are a lot of rich people in this world, and people like to have a portfolio of investments, and some people, some will be offered the option of investing in vintage watches, and maybe they have an interest, but it is speculation. It's pure speculation, that market, and some people just like to speculate. Often, if you can invest in a watch at the right time, or any collectible basically, then you're probably going to do okay in the long run.
Sure. I guess it's fairly rare where a commodity sort of overlaps with an enthusiast hobby. I guess maybe you could look at some classic cars or maybe even modern Porsches, but not a lot of people have the same enthusiasm around a stock or a share or a more normal sort of way of investing money.
Yeah,
so I guess that's where it can offend some people that would rather see the watches on enthusiast risk, getting dings in them, not being sat in a safe purely for their appreciation long term.
Yeah, you're right. It's a peculiarity of the vintage watch market, or vintage watch collecting, that you can soon find yourself getting more involved in watches as investments if you're not careful, rather than appreciating them for what they are and what originally drew you to vintage watches and sparked your interest.
Sure. As you said from the beginning, I know you've mentioned you have a fair few customers that are able to make watches a paying hobby, in that not so much they're looking to profit for other things, but more it can fund the hobby. You can buy the next watch and buy the next watch. So I appreciate that side of things from enthusiast perspectives. But
it makes, after all, the way a lot of watch traders, such as myself, started. You begin collecting watches and you get carried away with them, and so you find yourself with quite a large collection and buying and selling them. I perhaps wish my hobby had turned into a business a little bit sooner. I kind of took early retirement in my 50s to kick this off, turn my paying hobby into a business. There's a lot to be said for it. There's a lot to be said against it, I think.
Good stuff. So equally contentious, I'd say. Equally strong opinions on both sides of things. We're going to be talking about for and against restoration, when to, and more importantly, when not to restore a vintage watch. I guess we're talking about. We should make that distinction early on. We're talking about vintage stuff. There's a big difference between restoring and then repairing or servicing. That's separate things.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that as a vintage dealer? Is there a time to restore a watch, or is there equally a time not to restore a watch?
Yeah, so there are people that are firmly in both camps. Some old school collectors will say you're destroying the charm, the originality and the beauty of a vintage watch by restoring it. You should never do it, and also you're destroying the value. There are people with equally strong opinions that would say, I want a presentable watch on my wrist and not a damaged one. The other part of this, of course, is that it depends on what type of watch we're talking about. So the vintage dress watch market is different to the opposite, the other end of the scale, which is the vintage military watch market. I don't think there'd be many people that would say you should restore a military watch. You would repair it and keep it as presentable as possible, but you wouldn't start restoring the dial or polishing the case. At the other end of the market, there's the vintage dress watch market. And particularly the vintage gold dress watch market, which has been my area for the past 15 years or so. By far the largest majority of my customers will prefer a fully restored watch.
Oh, sure. You mentioned not an experiment, but an observation maybe from over the summer of a comparison of unrestored watches versus very similar but restored watches and the buying trends there?
We found it quite difficult during lockdowns, obviously, to get work done. And,
Right.
And we had watches in stock that which we would normally have restored the dials on, but we put them up because we were short of stock as well. And we found that that they didn't command any premium. That, they weren't as popular, even though the price was perhaps slightly cheaper because we hadn't restored the dial. But in the past, when we've put two fairly similar watches on the site at any given time, one with a fairly good unrestored dial and one with a restored dial, we find in the dress watch market that the fully restored watch will always sell quicker than the unrestored watch.
Super interesting. Really good insight. My thoughts are that, obviously, as you've alluded to, there is no final answer, but it does often come down to what type of watch it is. So we look at some of the famous watches, a Paul Newman Daytona or Karl Lagerfeld's PVD black-coated Royal Oak watches with provenance in a similar way to the military IWCs and Dirty Dozen pieces.
Yeah.
They're what some would call patina, or what some would even call damage, is their battle scars and their what gives the watches the provenance and what makes them so special. So obviously, I guess that's one reason why I personally would never restore. But the other side of things might be, watches are great to pass down, and a lot of people inherit watches, and it's a nice way of passing on legacies. And obviously, in a similar way to the battle scars, or where one person might see a ding or a knock or a scratch, it's memories for a lot of people. So I guess that's the other reason. But then equally, as you've mentioned, dress watches are meant to look good and aesthetic, and patina's not always kind. We see I know about sort of tropical dials and the premium that they can offer, but
one person's patina is another person's horrible looking dial.
Yeah, mouldy. Yeah, no, I've seen sort of watches that have been left in damp environments that haven't turned nice chocolatey browns, but sort of maybe vegetation even. So I guess that is the time to give the watch a new life and to zhuzh it up a bit.
Yeah, but some people they hear it said or read it that online that that the value is all in the dial. Well, it's true perhaps of really special collector's pieces. The vintage Patek market perhaps at the upper end, or Rolexes or sports watches, particularly the Submariner I'm thinking of. The value certainly is in the dial. So when somebody says that you should never restore a dial, then it's true for certain watches, but it's not true for every watch.
Sure. And I guess it's also worth noting that not all restorations are equal, and I've seen some shockingly restored Omegas and a lot of Orises with sort of big chunky where they've plotted the wrong loom, and then equally you have some really fine work where it's really barely noticeable with an original compared to a restored dial that any work has been done at all.
Yeah, I mean dial restoration has just got better and better over the past 10, 20 years or so. Even some of the heritage sections of the major brands that have keep collections such as Omega or Vacheron, they will be quite happy to use a top level restorer to restore a dial and place it in their museum. I know that for a fact because I know dial restorers that have done that work. So
good stuff. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it. I love that the Houdinki video where they. I think it was a chap an American chap was wearing a Tudor Submariner. I think it was in Vietnam, and through an altercation it fell off his wrist. It actually took a bullet and fell off his wrist.
Yeah.
And his medic parceled it up and put it in his pocket. It was in a battlefield, and sort of moved off. And I think Houdinki managed to bring these two chaps together 30, 40 years later, and he still had the watch. It completely annihilated. The case had been warped by the bullet. It was beautiful, really.
Wow.
And Tudor got involved. Obviously, saw it as a good time to show their heritage and to use it as a marketing exercise nicely, and restored it. I sort of saw the guy making a jig out of metals and banging the case back to a point where they could get a spring bar in, and I guess they did use a few new parts, but they used a lot of original parts, which was really nice to see. And when it was finally restored, you know, it was the dial was perfect, but you could see where it had that battle scar. So awesome restorations like that, I'm all for.
I mean, to make a watch useful again, that's gone through that kind of damage, it's quite. It just shows what can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, on the topic of oyster cases, our final topic of this video surrounds the Rolex oyster case and its importance in Rolex history. Is the Oyster Perpetual Rolex's most important watch? I know you've got some opinions on this.
Yeah, so it's where my passion lies, really, the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. It's the watch I first started collecting, particularly 50s Rolex Oyster Perpetuals. And they've always been popular as gold dress watches. They're really semi-sports watches.
Yeah.
But it's quite remarkable how, you know, the obviously Rolex has really moved on since the 50s, and they're a massive company now and have huge success with their sports range. But not many people connect their model range with the original Oyster cased watch, and there's a direct family line all through to all the current watches available from Rolex, but perhaps not the Cellini and the ladies' watches, obviously. But it truly was groundbreaking for Rolex. It's the foundation on which the company was made, and the Oyster Perpetual, obviously still available today, is I don't think it gets the recognition that it really should have. Obviously, the Oyster denotes the waterproof case, and Perpetual it denotes the automatic movement. But they've almost become descriptors rather than a celebration of the model, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think they've diluted that branding of Oyster Perpetual. I think it says it on basically every sports watch dial, Oyster Perpetual, just because of the case and the movement.
Yeah.
But I could completely agree. When you look at the icons in the watch industry, it's a lineage that tends to favour those watches. You look at the Submariner and the way the Oyster case, the profile of a Submariner is pretty consistent in a similar way to a 911 or a Speedmaster or watches like that. But I think probably one of the main reasons why why Rolex are on this pedestal now, why they are on this throne, is due to the Oyster case, in the fact that they nailed this transition from a utility item that workmen needed, a real tool watch, into a luxury good. Yeah. And I think the way they've done that is most, well, I don't know about most, but a fair amount of Rolex owners just have one watch, a Submariner or a Yachtmaster or something like that. And the fact that the Oyster case is there makes the watch such a versatile item. You could jump in the pool on your holidays.
Practical all-rounder, which is widely recognised for what it is.
Yeah.
And it's almost, for Rolex, it's almost winner takes all, isn't it? I think it's the watch to have. It's the default choice for many people, and they are built like tanks. So the Oyster case is really robust. The Rolex movements are robust, reliable, and accurate. So it was Rolex that really nailed that. Waterproof, shockproof, anti-magnetic, chronometer reliability. An everyday piece you can wear for all occasions. But so all the steel sports watches that have become so popular over the past 10 years have really made Rolex's name. But you can, as I say, if you retrace the line, it goes all the way back to 1926 when Rolex released their first Rolex Oyster cased watch, and it's obviously grown in size ever since. Quite a small watch then, when Mercedes Gleitz swam the channel in one, and then obviously in the 50s when further records were being made, conquest of Everest and 300-mile-an-hour speed barrier, this kind of thing. And Rolex has really capitalised on their marketing and being literally on hand at the right time in the right place.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of a perfect balance of a fantastic product that's equally well marketed. That, as you say, associating themselves with all these, Norgay and Hillary's climb, the world speed records, Wimbledon, all the sort of the higher end, Formula One, glamorous sports with wealthy watchers, basically.
While the steel sports market has really exploded in the past 10 years or so, we've happily carried on selling lots of oyster perpetuals in gold. People love them. They're if you want a gold watch, and gold watches are becoming much more popular now. Steel certainly had the market in its grips over the past 10 years, but I think that's swinging the other way now. And if you look at the news, the blogs that are coming out of most of the major watch dealers on the internet, there's a lot of talk about gold watches now, whereas there wasn't, or certainly less so, 2 or 3 years ago.
For me, just an observation, part of that, you'll sit on a tube in London and Kensington or wherever and look left and look right, and you'll see 6 or 7 oyster cases, a GMT, oyster perpetual, a date just, etc. But when you see one of the watches in gold, you double take, and especially a vintage piece. I feel like there's so many more intricacies and little alterations that they did, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s compared with the modern oyster perpetuals. The little things that you can really geek out over and look into. Yeah,
and the other amazing thing is that people are quite happy to spend 10,000 plus on a steel sub, because that's the starting price these days, whether it's vintage or not, and yet you can buy a really fantastic 50s oyster perpetual. Admittedly 34 millimeters as opposed to 40 millimeters, so that's another swing in the market, which is going back the other way. But for 5,000 plus, a really great date just for 7,000 or 8,000. If you want a really special one, then 11 or 12. An early 50s one or an early 50s Rolex Day date. They're still circa £10,000, give or take. 1,000.
Absolutely, yeah.
And these are appreciating vintage watches which are bound to go up in value. Whereas who knows what's trendy in another 5 years' time in terms of the Rolex sports steel watch market.
So, bright green, I struggle. I went to Brighton yesterday to the lanes and the vintage watch shops, and just really struggled to explain to my girlfriend why this tiny, I think it was a beautiful watch, an Explorer or something, a steel 1016. Why that is 3 times the price of that yellow gold Seamaster or that Day or that bimetal Daytona. And I do sort of, obviously there's the provenance, but in terms of value for money, I think you're getting a lot more when you go for the precious metals at this climate, at this point of the market as well.
I mean, certainly, when I started vintage gold watches, a vintage gold dress watch was certainly more valuable than most steel Rolexes. If you put one side by side, but it's the way the market has gone. But I think it's perhaps going back the other way. We'll have to see.
Sure. Well, bringing it back to our original debate, I think we can agree with the fact that the oyster case is bloody important.
I mean, it's Rolex weren't the first to market a waterproof watch, but they were the first to successfully market a Rolex, a waterproof watch.
I'd add luxury in there as well. I can't find any adverts for a gold waterproof watch before Rolex's ads. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, I know you're a busy chap, Alan. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on. I hope you can join us again soon for another chat about watches.
I'd love to. Great to see you again, Patrick.
Awesome.
Let's do it again soon.
Let's. Thanks, Alan. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for watching the video. Remember, we're still very new to this style of content, so please let us know in the comments below what you'd like to see in future videos, as well as any feedback that you might have. We've also got access to the entire Vintage Gold Watches London Vault, so head over to their website and let us know which golden morsels you'd like to see in future uploads. If you're on Instagram, you can follow me at Patrick on Watches, Alan at Vintage Gold Watches, and the channel at Watch Talk Channel. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.